Hey, Shore students, welcome to this edition of Shore Students at Home. Today, I want to do a little short devotional on the idea of FOMO. That's right, the fear of missing out. With everything going on, all the different cancellations, we probably all feel like we've had this fear that we've missed out on something. There's a lot of things that should have or could have happened this year, and I agree with you. We just need a redo on 2020. And so what I want to do today is I want you guys to understand this. I want you to understand that God was not surprised by this virus. He's not surprised by what's happening. He's not surprised by the cancellations or even the reaction to this virus. And so I want you to understand that. And so because of that, we're not missing out on anything because he knew it was going to happen. So he prepared us for this moment, and he has prepared this moment for us. So there's something that he has for us to do. And what we need to do is follow him. And so today, I want to look at two different people that had FOMO. They had the fear of missing out. The first person I want to look at is Eve. And this is in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. And the story picks up here where Satan has disguised himself as a snake. And he is talking to Eve and trying to convince her to eat from the tree. And what happens here is Eve finally starts to give in. She's doing well and kind of fighting against it, but she starts to give in because she feels like she's missing out on something. God is holding something back from her. So let's read in verse 4 and see what Satan says to her that makes her feel like she's missing out on something. It says in Genesis chapter 3, verse 4, "No, you will certainly not die," the serpent said to the woman. "In fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The Bible then says that she immediately ate the fruit and gave it to her husband. And so that brought sin into the world. And so I want you guys to know that God was holding something back from her. And that is the idea and the knowledge of good and evil, because at this moment, she only knew good. She didn't know there was evil. She didn't know there was all these different problems and things that could happen in the world. But she now knows them because she's now sinned against God and she's separated. So God knew that if she did this, she would sin against him and they would have that separation, and this would bring sin to the whole world. And he didn't want that to happen. He didn't want her to bear that burden. But she didn't listen, and she did that, and that's where sin comes from. And so what we can learn from this is that God knows what we need, and we can trust him, and we can believe in him, and just follow him. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about how we could follow him with this next person. You see, the next person is Peter, and this is found in John chapter 21, and we're going to look at verses 18 through 22, and we're going to pick up kind of at the end, but I want you guys to know what's happening before this. Remember, Peter is, at this moment, he is getting his forgiveness. He's getting set back on the right track by Jesus because he had denied Jesus 3 times. Jesus died on the cross, was buried, and rose again. And one of the first things Jesus does is he finds Peter and he sets him back on the right track by saying, "Do you love me?" 3 different times. And I love that story, but I want to focus in on what happens right after that. And what happens right after that is Jesus says, "Hey, Peter, I want you to know you're going to grow old and you're going to die for me." And that's what he tells him. You're going to grow old and you're going to die for me. And so what I want to see in it's verses 21 and 22 is, Peter looks up and he looks at John and he says to Jesus, he says, "Jesus, Lord, what about him?" And this is what I want you guys to get. Jesus answered, he says, "If I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? As for you, follow me." You see, Peter was afraid of missing out on something. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure what he was worried about, whether he thought that he was getting a bad deal and John was getting a better deal, or maybe he was truly worried about what John was going to get. What was going to happen to John? He was one of the younger disciples. Maybe he was a little worried about him. And so maybe he's just has this fear of what is going to miss out in John's life. But Jesus made his answer very clear at this moment. He says to Peter, he says, "As for you, follow me." It doesn't matter what's going to happen to John. As for you, follow me. Just worry about what I've given you. And so I want you guys to kind of think about this. Between these two people, you've got Eve. She has this fear of missing out, that God's holding something back. But what God was holding back was something that she didn't need nor want. And then at this moment, God reveals something to Peter, but he's kind of worried about somebody else. What all Jesus wants us to do is to follow him. And it's just like he says, what is that to you? Don't worry about all this other stuff. As for you, follow me. And so that's what I want us to kind of walk away with today. And I want you guys to know that Peter understood this. Peter got this, because in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3, Peter says this. He says, his divine power has given us everything required for life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. In other words, he has given us everything we need through his divine power. Everything we need is given to us through Jesus. And so we don't have anything to worry about in that category. We don't have to have this fear of missing out, because everything we need, Jesus has given it to us, or he will give it to us when we need it. All right, so we need to trust that. We need to follow God. And I hope that today you guys look at that and just understand that we're not missing out on anything, because God has a great plan even during this time. So we don't need to have this fear of missing out, because he has given us everything through his divine power that we need. So I hope that encourages you guys this week. I hope you have a great week, and we can't wait to see you guys in person soon. Have a good week.